So thank you for tuning in to Talking Like a Tiger, podcast hosted by myself, Cassie Miller. I'm currently a senior at Louisiana State University studying dietetics. For those of you wondering what dietetics is, it is a field of study focusing on diet and nutrition and its effect on health. I created this podcast to explore the deeper forms of communication needed to be a successful dietitian. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Today, I have Brandie Faucheux here to chat about what it means to be a pediatric dietitian. Ms. Faucheux is a registered dietitian currently working at Ochsner Health here in Baton Rouge. She has been a dietitian for 2.5 years. Needless to say, Ms. Faucheux has a lot of experience not only counseling children, but working with families. Ms. Faucheux, you can go ahead and introduce yourself and feel free to expand on what it is that you do.
Hi, yes, I'm Brandie Faucheux. I actually was myself a Tiger at LSU, and I completed my dietetics undergrad there, and then went on to complete my dietetic internship at FRANU here in Baton Rouge again, at Our Lady of the Lake. And then I spent most of my beginning of my career working in the adult inpatient, and then I finally landed my dream job working with pediatrics here at Ochsner Health in Baton Rouge. So very excited to be here and kind of give my information for you to kind of put in your podcast so that way people know what a pediatric dietitian is and kind of things that I do as a pediatric dietitian.
All right, that's awesome. So what is a dietitian and how does being a pediatric dietitian differ from a typical clinical dietitian?
Yes, so the typical definition for like a dietitian per the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is a dietitian is an expert in all things food and nutrition, but more specifically, a dietitian is the expert in identifying and treating disease-related malnutrition and in conducting medical nutrition therapy to meet specific dietary needs and guidelines for all ages. In my own words, I would like to add that a dietitian can also be helpful in more than just nutrition specifically, but we can focus on other things like physical activity, bowel movements, lifestyle changes that can have some kind of impact on nutrition, or that nutrition may have an impact on. The difference between a pediatric dietitian and maybe your typical clinical dietitian, the biggest difference is just the pediatric dietitian will see anywhere from birth to 18 years of age, whereas a clinical adult dietitian will see beyond 18 years and older.
Okay. And you had mentioned the word medical nutrition therapy. So for those out there that don't know what it is, could you maybe explain a little bit of what that is?
Yes, medical nutrition therapy is what we use to kind of educate people that have chronic diseases, whether it be diabetes, cardiovascular disease. I mean, the list goes on. What we do is we provide nutrition education and nutrition therapy for those who are dealing with some kind of medical diagnosis or something that may help with that medical diagnosis. So that's kind of our slang, I guess you can say, for dietetics. We kind of use that medical nutrition therapy, and we're the only ones who can give that medical nutrition therapy to individuals who need it.
And so how important is effective communication when counseling your patients when you are giving medical nutrition therapy?
Communication is definitely key to like success and seeing them kind of meet their goals or their nutrition goals. In my opinion, you can know everything about nutrition. You can say that you know everything about dietetics, but if you're not communicating correctly to that patient or that family, or if something's not coming across the way that they need to hear it, then that communication's kind of lost, and that you may not see those goals or that person reach their goals in the next visit or for the couple more months to come.
So could you give a specific examples of instances where a method of communication worked or did not work?
Yes, so I would say there are some times when I'm educating a patient and they seem all in it, just to, you know, shaking their heads, saying yes or no, but unless you ask them to kind of repeat that information to you sometimes, they may have no idea what you're saying. For instance, there was a time whenever I asked, I think it was just educating them on vitamins and minerals, but instead of saying vitamins and minerals, I said the word micronutrients. They had no idea what micronutrients was. And so I had to kind of regroup and kind of be like, oh, well, your micronutrients are vitamins and minerals that we talk about all the time. So I kind of had to explain it a little bit more because that definitely went over their head.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I didn't explain that to them, then they may have not even known what I was talking about. And then they left without even knowing, where to get those micronutrients in, and then end up probably going to their doctor and getting a lab value or something like that, and said that they were deficient in vitamin D or deficient in iron or something in that kind of area. So I'm glad I went back to that statement and said, look, it's your vitamins and minerals, not this big, humongous word that, you don't know. So I had to explain it a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, I guess sometimes you forget that not everyone else is a dietitian, and you're so used to saying those words with your coworkers that when you go into a counseling session, it might slip out, but that's awesome that you caught that.
Yes.
So are there unique communication styles used by pediatric dietitians like yourself while counseling? And if so, what are they?
I don't think we use like anything different from what a typical maybe any dietitian in any kind of specialty would use. I think we use very similar styles. We use a lot of handouts and visual methods of communicating. We verbalize what we're saying and educate them. So I think I use very similar styles that you would see kind of across the board.
So in a previous podcast, I discussed with a classmate the role of a mentor and its potential importance in counseling pediatrics. In your professional experience, is the ability to be a mentor significant to the success of your patients?
Yes and no. So I think, yes, you can. Being a mentor is very helpful for some maybe older clients that are able to kind of look at me as like, oh, you're a little bit younger. I can kind of relate to that. But sometimes I'm not the mentor for younger kids. I may be the teacher, and I may be teaching the mother how to be the mentor to their child, but I'm not necessarily the mentor for them.
Okay, so you mentioned about possibly filling the role of teacher with some of your patients. So in podcasts to come, I'm going to explore deeper the roles of teacher and coach. Do you incorporate these specific styles of communication into your counseling strategies?
Yes, I do. I think I use them constantly and every day. More so the teacher part of things rather than the coach part, except for I think I use the coach part when I have more of those follow-ups later down the road. As being a dietitian, I think we forget that a lot of people don't know the basics of just nutrition in general and what that is and what that looks like. And so sometimes it starts there, and there's a lot of teaching going on. There's a lot of teaching either the patient, the child, the teenager, or even teaching the whole family as a whole. I have clients that come in sometimes and they bring their siblings, they have their mom and their dad in there. So I am a big role in that teacher role. As for a coach, I think that has to be something that you need to have, but not necessarily the first time you visit with the patient. Mm-hmm. That is something that you're going to consistently work at and consistently do when you follow up with them, because you can teach them everything, or at least most of the things, basic education wise. But in order for them to follow through with it, you want to be a coach for them, and you want to coach them through it so that way they can make those changes when they go home and when they leave you, because you can't go home with them. So you have to coach them in some kind of way on how to make those changes on their own.
So in one of my classes at LSU, one of the projects we had to do was a mock counseling session. So I've done one counseling session in my time as an undergrad, but one of the biggest things that my teacher told us that we needed to do was find something positive in their diet that they were already doing and highlight that and tell them how awesome that was and that they need to keep that up. Would that be an instance of where you would be a coach?
Yes, that's a great way to put it. I constantly do that because I don't want them leaving my office and just being like, this person just told me all the wrong things I'm doing. It's very helpful to tell them the good things that they're doing and to kind of use that to coach them into, so you've done this step, what's the next step after that? And so you're kind of coaching them into expanding those good habits and and those positive habits that they're doing.
Yeah. All right, so have you ever utilized all three styles of communicating, mentor, teacher, and coach when working with a patient? And if so, could you share that experience with us?
Yes. Do you mean like all at once?
Maybe all at once, or like with one particular patient, like you utilize all three of these forms in order for them
Yes.
to have success.
Awesome. So yes, you're going to eventually use all of these styles of communicating. I know I do with even just one patient. It may not be all in that one session or in that hour that I spend with them, but it kind of builds on itself. Mentor, maybe not all the time, because like I said, sometimes you're not going to be the mentor to some of these younger kids or those who just are kind of there like hanging in the office. You're kind of being the teacher and you're kind of coaching the family or the mom or the dad or the caretaker. You're coaching them on how to be a mentor for their child. So I don't think I'll ever use all of them kind of together for one patient, but I do think that it builds on itself. So I think the first time I see that patient, I'm probably going to be more of a teacher, and then I'll go somewhat into that coaching communication style. But then after that, after those follow-ups, eventually that mentor kind of comes into play, especially for those teens or older kids. They're learning to trust me and to build rapport with me, and that takes time. So when you get that time to kind of be a mentor for them, then that's when that mentor phase kind of comes in. And I think by being a mentor, you're also being a coach at the same time. So it may happen later on, but I kind of think it happens at each step at the time. So for instance, I'm trying to think of an example. So I had a patient that came in. She was nonverbal, but I talked to her mom, and her mom was just overwhelmed. She was on tube feed, so she was getting fed through her stomach using a tube instead of by mouth. And her mom was just overwhelmed. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, but she was just telling me that I just do whatever they tell me. That to me tells me that I need to first teach her kind of what is it like to, what is it like to feed somebody that has a tube feed, and kind of what are the things that I'm looking at in order for her to go home and do it and feel comfortable that her daughter is getting the nutrition she needs. Because in the beginning, she was just like, somebody told me at the hospital to do it like this, and that's how I've been doing it. But she had no idea what she was really doing. She was just doing what they told her. So I took that kind of chance to teach her and coach her on how to administer tube feeds, or if if it's a hot day and you need to add some more water, or I kind of taught her the things that she would want to look for when feeding her child through that tube feed. But at the same time, I was coaching her on how to do that. Now, as the sessions go on, will I end up being a mentor for that mom? Possibly. But that will kind of take time as more as she trusts me, she builds that rapport with me, and so on with that.
So I see that you're talking a lot about not just your pediatric patient, but it's a lot of dealing with the families, the mom, the dad, the siblings. And so I think a lot of people, when they, hear about like a pediatric physician or a pediatric dietitian, they think, oh, well, that person's really only working with the kids. So how much of it is interacting with the kids, but also how much is it interacting with the parents?
That's a hard question. It's definitely not 50-50, because sometimes I'll get patients that come in and the child is like all for it. They're like asking questions. They're more aware of their nutrition than their parents are. And they're kind of taking the full responsibility of the session. But then when you think about babies and infants and toddlers, really you're not working with the child, you're really working with the family, but you're just giving them advice on how to work with their child. Or you can have sometimes where the mom comes in or the caretaker comes in and they're telling you what their child eats, what they do this, and the child's in the back on their iPad. So it's not technically 50-50. It can vary very widely. Sometimes it is 50-50. Sometimes I have both of them talking at the same time. Now I will try and engage my kids as much as I can. You know, if they're not really talking and I want to ask them, oh, well, have you tried a strawberry? Or, you know, I'll pop in and ask them some questions too, just to get them, you know, talking if they will. But sometimes it's not, that's not a straight answer. It could be 50-50. It could be 10%. It can vary very widely.
So basically, it is a must to also be able to interact with parents, right? It's not just
yes. Yes, I was told. I think in my internship, I was told, "Oh, so you want to work with kids?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I want to work with kids." And they said, "Well, if you're going to work with kids, you have to know how to work with adults as well." And I was like, "Yep, I'm aware of that."
I'm currently a coach at Kids Strong in Prairieville. I don't know if you know what that is. Do you know what that is?
I do.
So, well, when I was interviewing for the job, their first question was like, oh, do you like to work with kids? I'm like, yes, I've been a swim instructor pretty much for the longest as I've been working. I was a swim instructor since I was a sophomore in high school, so I've definitely worked with kids. And they're like, well, what about parents? Do you like to interact with the parents? And I was like, yes, I learned quickly on as a swim instructor that parents want to be involved. They ask you questions. You have to be able to communicate the progress of their child with them. So you can't only just want to interact with kids, you also have to really be able and willing to interact with the parents. That was a lesson I learned early on.
Yeah, that's a good lesson though, because either the parents, and there's even just more than just the parents. It's the grandma, it's the siblings. I mean, it's you can work with a lot of people when you're working with kids, and that's kind of the reason why I went into this. Why I wanted to go into pediatrics, because I can maybe touch more than just the child's healthy lifestyle. I can probably touch the whole family, and kind of help everyone in that family without having to do like this whole family program or something like that. So
yeah, that is definitely a bonus. And one of the reasons why I'm very interested in going into pediatrics, I love just working with families, being around families, watching how other families interact with each other. I think it's really interesting. And then I also really do love working with kids and being a coach and a mentor to them. Because at Kids Strong, that's what we are. We're a coach first, but we're also a teacher and a mentor.
yeah, that is awesome. That is really going to help whenever you get to the point of either working with peds, or even if you don't work with peds in the beginning. It's still helpful to know how to work with adults as well. I kind of went the adult route and then the peds route, so I got a little bit of everything.
That's awesome. So is there anything else you'd like to share with us today?
Not that I know of, unless you have any other questions besides the ones that you asked me so far, anything about pediatrics or dietitian, being a dietitian or dietetic internship. I'm willing to just leave a comment or answer any kind of question you may have.
Let me think. I have so many questions about what a pediatric. So you had mentioned tube feeding.
Yes.
And you work at the Ochsner. Do you work at Ochsner, the Children's Hospital here, or just the regular Ochners?
It's one of the clinics, like the outpatient clinic. So I work very closely with mostly the gastrointestinal or the GI physicians, and then I also work with some of the general pediatrics physicians. But it's like one of the clinics, the Grove Clinic, that's kind of around the Mall of Louisiana. It's a new building, so it hasn't been too long. It hasn't been open for a really long time, but it's a new clinic. However, they are renovating the 5th floor of that clinic, and they want to make it all pediatrics, and they want to do it. It's going to be called the Super Clinic. So we're going to have specialties in psychology for pediatrics, GI, it's going to be neurology, speech, and OT. And then I'm also part of a multidisciplinary team for the feeding, what we call the feeding clinic.
Mm-hmm.
So we get a lot of like extreme picky eaters, selective eaters, and I see them with a team. So it's not just me. It is me, it's a psychologist, it is a GI doctor, it's a speech therapist, OT or occupational therapist, and then usually we have like a social worker and a nurse on that team. So it's a lot of us, and we do it once a month, but it's an awesome clinic. I love working with all of them. I think it's very important to know that as a practitioner or as a dietitian in general, you're not just going to be working with yourself. You're going to need that interdisciplinary team to kind of help you out, because it does take a whole team to kind of help with some patients.
So what's like the spectrum of cases that you'll see at an outpatient, if that makes sense?
It does. I see a big range. So now, if I'm the only dietitian there here in Baton Rouge, so if we were to have more, we could possibly take over like some certain specialties, but I kind of see anything that they need a dietitian for. So I see tube feeders, I see picky eaters, selective eaters, feeding disorders, I see malnutrition, failure to thrive, weight management or obesity, what else? Diabetes, pretty much everything you can think of, I will see in some kind of way. The only thing that I'm a little bit more cautious of that I will try to refer out for are like those who have like eating disorders, like bulimia, anorexia, things like that.
So that kind of brings up a good point. So a lot of people, when they think of dietitians, they think that, oh, well, they'll see people who have anorexia, bulimia, those types of eating disorders, and that's not the case, correct?
We do see them, but I feel that I would rather a dietitian who specializes in eating disorders see them before me. Because then you get, sometimes they're just a little bit harder to work with. There is a certification you can get that kind of helps with being that specialist for eating disorders, just kind of like pediatric specialist, or they have like the nutrition support specialist and certification, and like the sports dietetics, that kind of thing. But for eating disorders, it kind of gets a little tricky, because then you're kind of following into the emotional aspect of eating. And I feel like a specialist, and still a dietitian, but just a specialist in eating disorders, I would rather refer them out to them.
And then would the dietitian specialize in eating disorders, would they work alongside a psychiatrist, or would they work by themselves with that patient?
They could. Now they may work by themselves with that patient, but that patient's probably going to be seen by like a physician and a therapist or somebody like that.
Okay. That is interesting. I did not know that. So
yeah. Usually they do have like a psychologist or a therapist or somebody they're working with already, and those therapists or that psychologist will refer like to a dietitian if they feel that it's something related to like a bulimia or anorexia, or if it's to a point where they're severely underweight and they need help kind of getting back on track with their nutrition and eating, and that's when kind of we're referred out to.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And there's a lot of different specialties. I find that we're getting a little bit more specialized in dietetics. So you have your sports, individuals, you have your eating disorder dietitians, and you got your pediatrics and your adult, and then you have oncology. So I find that we're going to become, or I'm hoping that what happens to the profession is that we start to kind of have these specialties, and that way we can serve these patients a little bit better, because we're specifically looking at that one specialty. So hopefully that's how it continues to grow, and hopefully we'll have even more specialties, like GI dietitians, and I hope it gets to be like more specialized in that area, because there's a lot of different disorders that we see, and nutrition is a huge part of some of those things. So I'm hoping that we expand and we get more specialties in the future.
Yeah, I hope so too. That would be awesome after I come out of my internship, if there was lots to choose from.
Yeah.
And so how do you go about being specialized?
Depends. So the academy does have their own specialties. So they have like a nutrition support. They have an oncology certification. They also have some like a pediatric and like a general pediatric certification that you can get. But then you also have some other they're not per the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, but like a lactation consultant who works with mothers who are breastfeeding. Like you can get a certification for lactation. So you can work just with breastfeeding moms or just have that specialty for you. You can also be a specialist in oncology. So those are, and sports is the other one that they have for the Academy. So there's very few, but then they have other certifications like that lactation certification that I mentioned that can also help with just expanding your knowledge in that area and then helping a little bit more broader individuals.
And so you had mentioned about working on a team, right? There was you, a psychologist, and multiple other people on this team. What communication styles do you use there?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I never really thought about it, but like with the team or with the patients as well?
With the team. So
Okay.
communicating with your coworkers as a pediatric dietitian, what would that look like?
Yeah. I don't know if I would say like a teacher or a mentor, but then I could be a teacher in that part of it, because there are times when I learn a lot from these other disciplines, and I realize how connected we really are with them and how we really need each other, especially dietitians and speech therapists. We are very connected.
Oh, really?
A lot more connected than you think, because as the dietitian, we're telling them, we want their nutrition to be adequate, meet their needs as they grow. Um, but if they can't do that, let's say they have some kind of swallowing issues like dysphagia, or they have to have thickened liquids or something where they can't just eat whatever they want, then that's when the speech therapist comes in to say, oh, well, they can't swallow, like they have dysphagia. So then they can't just eat whatever you're offering. So you really have to work with the speech therapist to see, well, what can they consume, or can they consume anything at all? So we are really intertwined a little bit when it comes to that. And then if they have OT is another one, occupational therapist will, see how our oral motor skills are. So if I have a child, and I see this a lot, if I have a child that is not really eating a lot of meats, or like chicken or ground beef or something like that, if they're not really doing well with those things, my first thing is to say, well, do we just not like it? And sometimes, the parent will be like, no, he'll like put it in his mouth and spit it out, but like he'll like suck on it or something like that. That makes me think, well, maybe we need to get OT referral place, so that way we can make sure that he has, those really good oral motor skills. Is his muscles and his cheeks and his jaw, are they able to, chomp the tough meats? Because that's one thing that, I think of. And if he doesn't have the muscle there, if it's very weak in his jaw, or the muscles in his oral motor, then that's when I'm like, oh, well, that's probably why he's not doing very well with those proteins. And that kind of gets rid of a lot of proteins after we take out all the meat, unless we go to beans or, something of nut butters or something like that. So that's when OT kind of comes into play as well. So you really have to think about this as a whole team approach, and you're going to work with them a lot when working in it. It's not just pediatrics, and it's in adults as well.
That is very interesting. I had not realized that. I hadn't thought that big. So, wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Faucheux, for giving us such insight into the life of a pediatric dietitian and describing the specific methods of communication you utilize to find success in your work. On my next podcast, I will be chatting with a registered dietitian who has been an elementary school teacher for over 10 years. So stay tuned to learn what it means and to talk like a teacher.